Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to come along today. The story of the Newport Transporter Bridge includes protest, war, industry, innovation, and more importantly, people. For residents, it is more than a landmark dominating the city's skyline. It is an iconic, memory-filled, important part of their history. But why was it built? How was it built? And why did its opening attract international attention? The Usk is difficult to cross with fast-flowing currents created by the second largest tidal range in the world. Newport's first bridge, the Town Bridge, was built by the 1100s. It was located upstream where the river narrowed and the banks rose. During the Industrial Revolution, coal and iron poured through Newport from the valleys to the north. Newport's foundries roared, her docks heaved, and the streets bustled with an influx of workers. At the start of the 1800s, Newport's population was just over 1,000, but by 1901 this had risen to 67,000. The west side of the town had grown crowded, and Newport Corporation were looking to develop the east bank. A second river crossing downstream was urgently needed. Newport was an ideal place for heavy industry, and in 1896, the steel firm John Lysett Limited began negotiating with Newport Corporation to relocate their steel mills from Wolverhampton to the east side of the town. Facing competition from nearby Barry, Newport were keen to entice Mr. Lysett and sought parliamentary permission to improve the transport across the river. With this in mind, the sheet rolling works opened in 1898 and became known as Orb Works. For some of these workers who had settled on the west, this would mean a 4-mile walk to work to cross the river at the Town Bridge, a 4-mile walk which took them past many, many pubs. Now, the difficult task of choosing a suitable crossing was given to borough engineer Robert Haynes. A ferry boat service would be dangerous and inconvenient because of the rise and fall of the tides. A subway, too expensive. A conventional bridge would need a long approach to attain sufficient height to allow the tall ships to pass under to access the town dock, and a swing bridge would encroach on the shipping lanes. He saw an article on a transbordeur in an engineering magazine designed by Frenchman Ferdinand Arnodin. He was attracted to the idea of a transporter bridge and so took a delegation over to Rouen, where one was in the final stages of construction, to meet Arnodin, who is in the far left of the photograph that you can see here on the screen. The new concept of the transporter bridge was a combination of a bridge and a ferry. Arnodin's design raised the ferry to allow it to glide smoothly from shore to shore in a direct and level line, regardless of the tide or mud. It presented no hazards to shipping. The delegation were thrilled with the Rouen Bridge and unanimously proposed that it was the only structure achievable within the borough's resources. An innovative design, unlike anything they'd seen before. It would provide a reliable and, for its day, a rapid crossing. Arnodin and Haynes became joint engineers, and after the plans had been converted from metric to imperial, on the 8th of November 1902, the first foundation stone was laid and work officially began. With the Newport design, the ferry became known as the gondola, the moving carriage from which it suspended the traveller, and the beam along which this runs the boom. The traveller would be pulled to and fro by cables from the motor house to be built in the east. During its construction, the bridge received heavy press attention from across Britain. People were interested in the new structure and how it was being built. The company Dorman Long from Middlesbrough provided the steel superstructure. The latticework steel towers were built on stone piers with steel shoes. The piers are masonry wells sunk into the hard underlying alluvial deposit in the river. To construct the tower bases, airtight chambers were built under each of the stone piers. Men were sent into the chambers through airlocks to excavate the foundations. The pressure in the chambers was maintained at a higher level than outside. At the end of each day, the pressure in the chambers was reduced to allow the pier bases to be gradually lowered. It was one of the first times such a system was used in Britain. The main cables are fixed in massive anchorages built above ground on a concrete raft with timber piles. Set at a slight angle, they act like giant tent pegs holding the building to the ground. These cables are kept at the right tension to create the bridge's stability. Workmen scaled the cables in large wicker baskets that you can see here. The towers were constructed using a considerable amount of temporary bracing and electrically driven cranes. They needed to be in place and the suspension and anchor cables fixed before work could start on the boom. Whereas the towers are rigid structures, the boom is designed to adjust to climatic change and the weight of the traveller as it moves to and fro. It is not fixed to the towers, but suspended from them, held either side by greased rubbing strips, allowing it to move lengthways. The main underframe was then lifted in sections from barges in the river. The sides and overhead stiffeners were then added. All cable work was tensioned to bring the boom to its correct alignment. In 1906, the bridge was a monument of engineering ingenuity, a giant with the grace of Apollo and the strength of Hercules, as newspapers reported. During construction, the people of Newport and engineers from various parts of the country watched the progress of the undertaking with curious, cynical, sympathetic, and sometimes hostile interest. From the positioning of the first stone to the point of completion, no reported life was lost in construction, which took 4 years at a cost of £98,000. No other bridges like this existed in Britain, and only 3 other bridges were operational worldwide, including ones in Spain, France, and the US. The 242-foot tall bridge was officially opened by Godfrey Fowles Morgan, the first Viscount of Tredegar, on the 12th of September 1906. Roads were lined with crowds of people and decorated with flags and bunting. The band of the 4th Battalion of the South Wales Borderers played the national anthem. The opening was the first major event ever to be filmed in Newport, which shows that even then people realised it was a monumental part of Newport's history that needs to be preserved for future generations. On that day, the bridge closed at 9 p.m, and nearly 8,000 people had paid the halfpenny toll and crossed in the gondola, with an additional 210 people making the climb across the top to take in the panoramic views of the city. Total take-ins amounted to £20, 14 shillings and 5p. It really was a huge event in Newport's history. And what we need to remember is that for the town's communities, it was like having the future right there on their doorstep. At the time, most buildings were below 4 stories, and yet here was this huge structure towering over them, powered by electricity, when most of their homes were still lit by gas and heated by coal. So for today, here's where the bridge's story ends. But it's an exciting time for the Newport Transporter Bridge, as we're about to embark on an extensive restoration of the steel structure and also the construction of a brand new visitor centre. So please do follow us on social media to find out more. Thank you.